Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Zimmerman. I'm the voting rights advocate at the Disability Law Center, and I also help to coordinate Rev Up Massachusetts. I'm a white woman with long blonde and pink dyed hair. My hair is pulled back today in a ponytail, um, and I'm 30 years old. I have round glasses and um, I'm wearing a black and white top today. So for today's agenda, we'll start with introductions and housekeeping. I'll go over the intros and housekeeping. The next 20 minutes from 1:05 to around 1:25, we'll talk about voter registration. From 1:25 to 1:50, our legal director at Disability Law Center, Tatum Pritchard, is going to be talking about accessible remote voting at home and in facilities. And at 1:50 to 2:10, our DLC managing attorney, Tom Murphy, will be talking about accessible in-person voting. And in our last 20 minutes, I will be closing out, talking about some opportunities to volunteer and get involved with RevUp. And we'll hopefully have some time for questions. All right, so we'll dive into housekeeping and accessibility. First, we have a CART provider who's captioning this webinar today. To view captions, you'll click the CC or Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It may also be under the More button depending on your device. To adjust font size and color, click the caret or up arrow in caption settings. You may also use the link in the chat to view the captions, which that link should be in the chat right now. ASL interpreters will be spotlit and readily visible on your screen while they're interpreting. So we have Abby and Alicia today interpreting for us. If you hear any of the ASL interpreters speak, just know that they're interpreting for someone who's speaking ASL. And please let us know in the chat or Q&A box, I believe it's the chat box today, if you have any issues with accessing captions or viewing ASL interpreters. So we have a really busy agenda today, meaning a limited time for questions at the end of the presentation. We will most likely not get to everyone's questions, although we'll try our best. So you can type your questions in the chat. You can either send your question to everyone on the webinar or select the drop-down menu and click hosts and panelists if you'd like to ask your questions by typing them. You can also, at the end of the webinar, unmute. We'll invite you to unmute and raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask out loud. Please try to keep chat use to a minimum and only use the chat to type your questions because it can be distracting. If we didn't get to your question, no worries. We'll share questions we received and our answers after the webinar. And you might want to contact me if you have any remaining questions. So my email address is bzimmerman@dlc-ma.org. And my phone number is 617-315-4593. All right, on this screen we have a Rev Up Massachusetts logo in red, white, and blue. And it says Rev Up Mass, register, educate, vote, use your power, make the disability vote count. So introducing Rev Up. Rev Up is a statewide group of organizations, self-advocates, and volunteers. We're part of the national movement by the American Association of People with Disabilities to make the disability vote count. So some of our Rev Up Massachusetts work includes helping people with disabilities register to vote, educating voters with disabilities about their voting rights, advocating for accessible voting in Massachusetts, And there are many different ways to participate in Rev Up. We'll be discussing those different ways to participate today. And if you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website and also the American Association of People with Disabilities, or Rev Up National's website. And I've linked those on this slide, which you should have received slides before this webinar. You'll also receive them again afterwards. And introduction to the Disability Law Center. We are the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Massachusetts. We're a private, nonprofit legal services organization. All U.S. states and territories have P&As. As a protection and advocacy agency, we investigate abuse and neglect of people with disabilities. We provide legal representation to people with disabilities and provide advocacy services to people with disabilities. Under the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access, called PAVA program, P&As receive funding to make sure people with disabilities can vote accessibly. So we do things like educate people with disabilities on their voting rights. We help people with disabilities vote and make sure that voting is accessible. And of course, we also help to coordinate the Rev Up Massachusetts Coalition. And you can visit our website to learn more about our work. All right, so now we'll get into the meat of the presentation. And first, we'll start out with who can vote. That's really step one in helping to register people to vote. So we will have polls in this presentation, and I will be launching this first poll question in just a second. First, I'll read it out loud, and then I'll launch the poll. So we have a sort of a case study here of 4 different people, and I want to know who you think can vote in Massachusetts. Just note that everyone is 18 years or older, so age is not a factor here. So Max is from Argentina. He has a green card, lives in Massachusetts, and he works at UMass Amherst. Bill was born and raised in Worcester. He's currently in jail serving time for a misdemeanor. Chloe was born and raised in Framingham, where she currently lives with her legal guardian, where she currently lives in a group home. Her mom is her legal guardian, and she identifies as autistic. Juan was born in Puerto Rico and now lives in a nursing home in Massachusetts, close to his family members. He has a traumatic brain injury. He sometimes has trouble remembering things, but he's really excited to vote. And so I'll launch that poll. You should see 4 options on your screen: Max, Bill, Chloe, and Juan. You can select all that apply. And I'm just going to wait for a few more people to respond. Great. I think we're close to most of our responses. So I'll end the poll now, and I'll show you what people had to say. So you should see the results on the screen. 4 out of 16, or 25% of people, thought that Max could vote. Unfortunately, because he has a green card and he's not an official US citizen yet, he cannot vote yet. But when he does get citizenship, he can vote. Bill, 75% of you said that Bill could vote, and that's correct. Bill can vote because he's serving time for a misdemeanor and not a felony. We'll talk about that more in a second. 88% of you said that Chloe could vote, and that's absolutely correct. Chloe can vote. Even though she has a legal guardian, she can vote. And Juan, 94% of you said that Juan could vote, and that's correct. He can vote. Um, and sometimes people get a little bit confused when people have a disability that makes it difficult to remember things, or sometimes people get mixed up and think Puerto Rico is not part of the US, but it is, of course. Um, so most of you got that correct, though, so that's great. All right. So who can vote in Massachusetts? You can vote in Massachusetts if you're a citizen of the US, you live in Massachusetts, you're 18 years or older. But do know that if you're 16 or 17 years old, you can actually pre-register to vote. And so that's a good way to be prepared to vote on your 18th birthday. You can also vote if you're not currently serving time for a felony conviction. And if you don't have a guardianship that prevents you from voting. And we'll talk about when specific cases when a guardianship might prevent someone from voting, but it's usually not the case. Just know that rules around who can and cannot vote are different in each state as well. So this is only the case for Massachusetts. All right, so felony convictions and voting. If you're not currently serving time for a felony conviction, you can still vote. So a felony is a more serious crime, and a conviction means that you were found guilty of that crime. So this means that you can vote if you have a pretrial criminal case. This means you haven't been found guilty yet. You're serving time for a misdemeanor, which is a less serious crime. And you've finished serving time for a felony conviction. So you can vote if you have a criminal record, and you can vote while you're on probation or parole. And I've linked Prisoners Legal Services voting resource that you can check out later for more information. So guardianships and voting. In Massachusetts, you typically can vote if you have a legal guardian. The only exception, and this is rare, is if a judge has taken away your right to vote, then you can't vote. If you don't have the right to vote, it would be written in an order that a judge signs called a guardianship decree. And this is very rare, as I said. A judge is the only person who can tell you you cannot vote. And so election workers, family, friends, caregivers, medical professionals, and legal guardians can't take away your right to vote. All right, registering to vote. So there's a few different ways that you can register to vote in Massachusetts, including online, by mail, or in person. I have a few images on the screen, one of a laptop and cell phone, another of an envelope, and another of a person in a wheelchair, and a person in a dress. So registering to vote online. You can register to vote online by 11:59 p.m. on the voter registration deadline, which is typically 10 days before an election. Any voter can check their registration information, such as making sure that your name is correct, your address is correct, and your political party is correct. And you can update that information as well on the Secretary of State's website, which I've linked in this slide. To register to vote online or update your registration, you have to have a signature on file with the RMV. So that means that you have to have a state ID, a driver's license, or a learner's permit. And you can use any device like a smartphone, tablet, or a computer. And I have images of a cell phone and computer, laptop computer at the bottom of this screen. And I've also put a couple of images of what the online voter registration system looks like when you go on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website. There's an image screenshot of that website. It says online voter registration system at the top. You can click from a variety of languages, and it says, what would you like to do today? Register, pre-register to vote, update address and or party, update name, check registration info. And so it's a pretty easy way to register to vote and also to check your registration. On this next slide, I have an image of the next part of the online voter registration system. And it will mark anything that's required, any questions that are required with an asterisk. It'll basically ask for your name, your date of birth, and your 9-character ID number. So like I said, if you're registering to vote, you do need to have an ID, like a driver's license, a permit, or state ID on file. And you'll check a box that says you consent to the use of your signature on file with the Massachusetts RMV. You can also register to vote by mail using a printed form. So forms can be downloaded and printed in a variety of languages on the Secretary of State's website. You don't need to have any sort of special ID or anything to register to vote by mail. Anyone can register to vote by mail as long as they're eligible to register. Your registration form has to be postmarked by the voter registration deadline, so 10 days before an election. I always recommend that people do it as soon as possible before an election because you want to have enough time for it to be delivered to your election office in the mail. And if the person has a disability that prevents them from providing a signature, so they have trouble maybe gripping a pen or, um, you know, reading independently, they can't provide their own signature, they can have a helper sign on their behalf. But that has to be with the voter's permission. And I have the top portion of a Massachusetts official mail-in voter registration form. As I said, you can look at this as well on the Secretary of State's website. This top form basically has the instructions, who is eligible to register to vote, ID requirements. And so the instructions are pretty clearly laid out here. The bottom half of the form has boxes where you will answer questions. The same questions are true as the online form. Your name, you can put your former name, for example, if you've changed your name recently. Your residential address, your mailing address, which it might be different, and we'll go over that in a second. Your date of birth, your ID number, and your party enrollment. And if you have somebody assisting you, they'll put their information on this form. You'll also want to make sure that you check the top question, which is very easy to miss. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? And if you click no, you shouldn't complete the form. Registering in person. You can also, of course, register in person at your local election office. This can be called different things depending on where you live. So it might be called an elections commission, a city or town clerk, a board of registrars. It really depends on your city or town. You can also find your local election office's information on the Secretary of State's website, and their offices are located in Boston, Springfield, and Fall River. ID requirements. ID, you'll need to provide some sort of ID when you are registering to vote or voting for the first time in your city or town. And so a lot of people don't know that ID can really be anything with your name and address on it, including driver's license, ID card. Those are the classic examples we think about. But it can also be a recent utility bill, a voter registration affidavit, which basically says that you swear that you're the person that lives at the address that you're registering at, or any other document that has your name and address on it. And we'll talk about voter registration drives. This slide has a picture of four people standing behind a table. It's myself and my supervisor, Nancy, um, and two self-advocates from Mass Advocates Standing Strong, and we're at the Mass Western Region Conference in Springfield. We're standing behind a table that has a bunch of swag and pamphlets on it. So the basics of a voter registration drive. A voter registration drive is really an event that's focused on people getting registered to vote. And specifically, DLC and Rev Up try to focus on registering people with disabilities to vote. So there are several kinds of locations that we might go to, including senior centers, community centers, facilities where people with disabilities live, and other places where people with disability might receive services such as day programs, independent living centers, libraries, etc., or different community events like farmers markets, fairs, or conferences. And just some tips for holding a successful voter registration drive. So first of all, be prepared. Bring printed registration forms and vote by mail applications. It can be really helpful because there might be people who register for the first time that also want to submit their vote by mail application at the same time. And have a plan for returning those registration forms. Bring a device or ask if there's devices available. Some people might want to register to vote online. You can also bring printed materials on voters' rights. I highly recommend it because it can be both helpful for you and for the people that you're registering. You can just sort of reference it throughout the day. You'll you'll also want to be nonpartisan. And so, of course, all of us have our own opinions, but we want to make everyone feel comfortable with registering to vote. Respect voters' choices, let them know about different options for registering. And if they seem hesitant, don't pressure them. You can always give them voter registration forms to bring home with them and fill out later. And you need the voter's permission to sign and fill out the registration form on their behalf. So if they ask for help, or if you offer help and they accept it, that's okay, but never fill out or sign a form without the voter's permission. And I also have a slide in here about registration address and mailing address. So voter registration address determines what city or town you'll vote in, while mailing address determines the address that your election mails goes to. So some people and facilities might have their mailing address as home, but their registration address as the facility address. Or some might have both addresses as home. You'll just kind of want to ask some questions like if the voter uses a different mailing address, do they have someone at home who's bringing their mail to the facility to them? And I'll pass it on to Tatum.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tatum Pritchard. I'm the legal director at the Disability Law Center. I am a white woman with brown hair, wearing glasses and a blue blazer, and I use the pronoun she, her. I'm going to be talking today a bit about remote voting at home and in different kinds of facilities. Next slide, please. First, we're going to start with a poll about voting options with a particular person that we have made up to see what you all think about her options when she is ready to vote. So Veronica is a Northampton resident who's 18 years old, and she wishes to vote in her first election, but will be unable to go to her polling place on election day because she'll be attending college in Boston. She tells you that she is legally blind and cannot access a standard print ballot independently. So, what will you tell Veronica about her voting options? And for this one, you can select all that apply. The first choice, Veronica has to go back to Northampton to vote. Second, Veronica can cast her vote through vote by mail. Third, Veronica can vote by absentee ballot. And fourth, Veronica can vote electronically. And Brianna, you'll just need to tell me when we're ready because I can't see the votes coming in.
Yes. We'll wait 1 second.
And yeah,
Looks like most people have submitted an answer, so I'll end the poll. And I've shared the results.
thank you. So um, we have all the answers are in. We have 13% believe Veronica has to go back to Northampton to vote. She absolutely does not. So long as she takes the proper steps in advance, she should be able to vote from where she is living in Boston while she's attending college. This, the second option, Veronica can cast her vote through vote by mail. That's correct. She can. 75% agreed on that one. As Brianna explained, so long as you have applied to vote by mail in a timely manner, she can absolutely vote by mail. The third option is Veronica can vote by absentee ballot. As we'll discuss shortly, that's also true. She will not be in Northampton where she would normally vote on voting day. So she can vote by absentee ballot if she applies to do so. And finally, Veronica can vote electronically. This is true, particularly through accessible electronic vote by mail, because as Veronica said, she's legally blind and she cannot access the standard print ballot independently. Because of that, she's entitled to an accommodation under our state law that allows her to vote electronically in order to vote privately and independently, meaning without having to seek assistance from a third party. Next slide, please. So as our hypothetical just laid out, there are generally 4 categories of remote voting that people can take advantage of. Some have limitations, others do not. There is the vote by mail program. That program was an invention during the COVID-19 pandemic. And essentially, our state already had absentee voting, but to ensure that everyone would be able to vote remotely during the public health crisis, they created the vote by mail program. The vote by mail program was incorporated into Massachusetts law permanently through the Votes Act of 2022. Accessible vote by mail, which was also incorporated into state law through the Votes Act, is a process by which, as an accommodation, people who cannot privately and independently vote through a standard print ballot and wish to vote remotely can do so on an online platform. That particular program is the result of litigation, court cases that the Disability Law Center filed in 2021, which the federal court order was then incorporated uh, essentially into the Votes Act at the time of its passage. Absentee voting is a longstanding voting program that allows people to vote remotely from home or wherever they happen to be if they meet certain categories, which we will discuss shortly. And then there's emergency absentee voting, which means you haven't applied in advance, but you find yourself in need of an absentee ballot generally because you're in a healthcare facility unexpectedly. Next slide, please. So, as the slide says here, vote by mail is available with no excuse required for most elections in Massachusetts. There are certain municipalities that we have seen that say that they're not going to make vote by mail available for a particular local election. So that is why there is why it says for most elections in Massachusetts. Either way, I will say, even though it's not on this slide, if people require an accommodation to vote because of a disability, they should absolutely be able to vote remotely and receive some kind of an accessible ballot. So that's something that we work on at DLC and would be happy to hear from folks if they have problems with that. But back to standard vote by mail, you can apply as Brianna was discussing with respect to the registration section, online, by mail, in person, and by email. Next slide, please. The accessible vote by mail or electronic ballot, as I said, is available as an accommodation for voters with disabilities who can't access the standard print ballot privately and independently. This can include a range of people. In the court cases that DLC brought, our clients and plaintiffs were individuals who were blind, legally blind, or had dexterity issues, meaning they couldn't open the ballot, they couldn't handle the ballot with their hands. If they received an absentee ballot by mail, they weren't able to open and handle the paperwork or the envelopes, or use their hands to fill in the ballot and sign it. And even if they went to the polling place, they would most likely be using an automark, as you'll hear from Tom later. So this provides necessary accommodations to ensure that everyone can exercise their fundamental right to vote and do so privately and independently. Since 2020, late 2021, the general election, and since the passage of the Votes Act in 2022, the Secretary of the Commonwealth and many other places in the state, municipalities, use an online platform called Voting Works. Through that platform, people can sign in and see their ballot as an electronic ballot that's screen reader accessible. It is secure, and it also allows you, in addition to using screen reader technology, you could also use it with other regular assistive technology, such as a sip and puff system that people might use if they're unable to utilize the computer using their hands. In addition to allowing you to fill in your ballot and certify your ballot electronically, It also allows for an electronic return through the platform. If you would rather mail your ballot or place it in a ballot drop box, you can also print the form that you completed through the platform and return that by mail or put it in the drop box in a hard copy. At the bottom of this slide, if people are interested, we have linked a video of voters who have utilized the accessible vote by mail platform, and that includes their thoughts and experiences with that platform, which from all accounts that DLC has heard have been very, very good experiences and have really improved their access to voting. Next slide, please. So again, you can apply to vote by mail and to utilize the accessible vote by mail program as an accommodation through all of the ways we've discussed. You can do it through an online submission on the Secretary of State's website. You can do it in person or by mail or email. And this particular slide has links to where you can find the website portal as well as downloadable applications. Next slide, please. Voting by absentee ballot is more limited than vote by mail, which is available to everyone. You can vote by absentee ballot when you'll be away from your city or town on election day. That could be for school, for work, for any other kind of travel. You have a disability that prevents you from voting at your polling place. I will say that in my experience, or at least from the experience of people that DLC has worked with, many towns treat this as a disability that makes it difficult to get to your polling place. You don't have to prove absolute impossibility or incredible hardship if you were to travel to the polling place. So I think any kind of asserted disability that really makes it a barrier to getting to the polling place is sufficient. Another category that qualifies you is you have a religious belief that prevents you from voting at your polling place on election day. You are on active military duty. You're a U.S. citizen living outside of the United States. You need an emergency absentee ballot due to hospitalization. So again, that's a later application stage. Or you're able to vote by absentee ballot if you're currently incarcerated on a misdemeanor and not a disqualifying felony sentence. Next slide, please. Emergency absentee voting program is an important one, and these are the conditions in which you're able to access it. If you're admitted to a healthcare facility within 1 week of the election, a voter can request an emergency absentee ballot. To take part in this program, you have to fill out an absentee ballot application and designate someone of your choice to deliver the ballot to you at the healthcare facility where you are currently situated. That same person designated will need to return the signed application to your local elections office, retrieve the absentee ballot, bring it to you, and return it by the close of the polls on election day. This is not an easy thing to implement, and it's something that DLC has tried to build awareness of and hopes to build even more awareness of amongst people who are in facilities, but also in the staff who work in healthcare facilities who may see this situation arise. So it's important for everyone to be aware of that. You do not give your right to vote up because you find yourself unexpectedly in a healthcare facility on election day. Or shortly before election day, you go and you're not entirely sure you'll be out in time to vote. Though not incorporated expressly into Massachusetts law, uh, we have received some indications that if you are in need of an emergency absentee ballot that is accessible, similar to the accessible vote by mail ballot, you should be able to request and receive one by contacting the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office and your local elections officials. If this is an issue, again, this is one that DLC is interested in hearing about. And it's important to highlight that emergency ballots can be requested up until the close of the polls. Next slide, please. It's also, in general, important to remember that even if you are not in a healthcare facility on an expected basis, if you live in one or expect to be there for a while and have been there for a while, you still have the right to vote. When we say facilities in this presentation, we're talking about a broad range of settings that includes, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, state institutions for individuals with a variety of disabilities, including locked psychiatric units and facilities operated by the Department of Developmental Services. It can also, in this presentation, include group living environments, also known as group homes, assisted living residences, veterans homes, and correctional facilities. None of those placements are disqualifying when it comes to your right to vote. Eligible voters who live in facilities should be able to get information about voting, elections, and their options for voting. Of course, exercise their right to vote when the time comes. Vote at a polling place, depending on access to transportation and limitations on leaving the facility. So for instance, if you're in a correctional facility, you're not going to be able to vote at the polls because they won't transport you to a polling site if you're being held on bail or serving a sentence. You should be able to, from a facility, vote remotely by mail. That's a typo in the slide if anyone's looking, not by email, vote by mail, accessible electronic vote by mail, absentee voting, or emergency absentee voting, as we just discussed. And you should be able to get some assistance with the voting process, especially if you're unfamiliar with how to vote while you're in a facility. Next slide, please. Again, voters who live in various types of facilities have the same rights as voters who live in the community. You should be able, if you are living in a facility, still be able to vote privately. You shouldn't have to tell anyone how, for whom you voted or share information about your choices. Voters should be able to vote independently. They can seek assistance with voting if that is the preference of the voter, but they are not required to accept help. Voters have the right to vote in a way that is accessible to them. So that is, again, another reason why accessible electronic voting is important. And we need to ensure that it's available everywhere that a voter might require access to it. Again, this last bullet just emphasizes that voters can get help with voting from anyone they choose. That includes a family member, friends, facility staff, neighbors, or community organizations or volunteers. Their choices are not limited because it is absolutely their choice who helps them. Next slide. Um, Facility staff and advocates can and should ask local elections officials for guidance with voter identification requirements, registration, and voting from a facility. Facility staff may ask the local elections office for a list of voters registered to their address. This can help narrow down who's already registered and who is not. And facility staff can make sure that registered voters receive their mail-in or absentee ballots. It can also ensure that they can offer registration to people who are not yet registered. Nursing homes should assist with transportation to polling places if residents prefer to vote in person. The same goes for group living environments and other types of facilities where there aren't limitations on people's ability to leave. At the same time, state law says that designated healthcare facilities, which include nursing homes and other types of facilities, should be coordinating with the local municipality in which the facility is located to have ballots delivered to the facility if need be. Next slide, please. So now we're on to another poll to test our knowledge from this portion of the presentation. Sam is a 70-year-old man who lives in a nursing home in Worcester. He's from Charlton. Sam had a stroke last year, which makes it difficult for him to move his hands and grip a pen. He tells you that his sister is his legal guardian. His sister doesn't think that it's a good idea for Sam to vote, but his guardianship order does not mention his right to vote. So the question is, can Sam vote in Massachusetts? And if so, who can help him register to vote? Here, you're supposed to choose only one. Number one, Sam cannot vote because his legal guardian, his sister, did not give him permission. Number two, Sam cannot vote because he has a legal guardian, period. 3, Sam can vote. Only his legal guardian can help. 4, Sam can vote, and he can ask anyone he wants for help with voting. And 5, Sam can vote, and he can apply for and should be able to access accessible vote by mail. So when I read them, I see that you can actually choose 2 if you want. Because 2 of them, I don't want to give a spoiler, but 2 of them are correct.
All right. Most people have answered at this point, so I'll end the poll.
Okay. Everyone got them right, pretty much. Everyone knew that Sam does have the right to vote and that he can vote with assistance from anyone he wants, and he can apply and should be able to access accessible vote by mail because of his dexterity disability. So great job, everyone. And now I'm going to hand it over to Tom Murphy.
Thanks, Tatum, and congratulations, everyone, for getting that last polling question correct. My name is Tom Murphy. I'm a managing attorney at Disability Law Center. I am a middle-aged white man, bald, with a rapidly graying beard. I'm wearing a gray shirt with a blue blazer. My pronouns are he, him, and my background is a Paris street scene. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking about voting in person and particularly polling place accessibility. As many of you probably already know, DLC teams up with REV UP Mass to coordinate polling place accessibility surveys across the Commonwealth. And we do that to ensure that polling places are accessible so that people with disabilities who choose to do so may vote in person. So as part of this, we are, and Brianna will talk a little bit more about this at the end, but we are hoping that many of you will help us in this endeavor. So I'll be talking a lot about what we would want you to be looking for if you are doing polling place accessibility surveys. If you choose to do so, just a couple of basic things for background. We would ask that you potentially bring a retractable tape measure, but especially something to take notes with. And also possibly a cell phone that has a camera for pictures. I'll be talking about that a little bit more. And you'll have a link when you receive the PowerPoint. You'll have a link to the polling place accessibility survey that we would ask you to follow and to fill out. Optionally, we understand many of you may not have, but if you do have a bubble or a digital level, that can be helpful at times, as well as a door gauge to measure opening and closing force of doors, but certainly not required. We would also ask that you communicate with the local election office and especially the warden or the person who is in charge of the polling place that you will be surveying. When you get there, before you do the survey, just to introduce yourself and explain that you are performing a polling place survey on behalf of an organization that advocates for the rights of people with disabilities. And if you are going to take photos, which can be helpful for us in our follow-up advocacy, we would ask that you only do that of issues that are outside of the polling place, and especially without any voters or poll workers or any other individuals in the photo itself to ensure privacy. We do provide more in-depth trainings on conducting the surveys, so please stay tuned for further information about that on our email list. Next slide, please. So as I'm sure many of you are already aware, polling places are required to be accessible. So Title II of the ADA, which pertains to state and local governments, ensures that people with disabilities have the right to fully and equally participate in voting, in the voting process. So that means that they have the ability to vote privately, independently, and with assistance if they choose, as Tatum spoke about a little bit earlier. And this also means that polling places where voters would vote in person should be accessible. And that includes not just the interior of the polling place, but the entire voting process. So we would ask, if you do a polling place survey, to think of the whole process that a voter would go through if they are going to be going to a polling place to vote in person. So the beginning of that process would be their arrival, and that would be either in a parking lot or at a drop-off area, or perhaps through public transportation. So from there, getting to the polling place itself, so that exterior path of travel would need to be accessible. The entrance and then the exit as well to the polling place itself. The interior path of travel once the person is inside of the polling place, and the entire voting area and any equipment that might be necessary in order for that person to cast their vote. Next slide, please. So I'll go through each of those individually. Now, there are some, fairly technical requirements under the ADA for accessibility. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about exactly what those are. If you're going to be performing a polling place survey for us, first and foremost, we would ask that you take a general common sense approach. And again, think of yourself as a voter with a disability who may be encountering a barrier or multiple barriers. Think about what those could be, and if you notice any that just don't seem right to you, best practice is be somewhat conservative and make a note of something that seems off. Don't worry about the specific technical details necessarily, but the more detail that you can provide us, the better. And and that way we can always follow up on it to take a look at whether or not the specifics, the specific requirements are being met. So starting with the parking lot, if there is parking provided for the polling place, then it must be accessible and there must be accessible parking spaces. That requires, the law requires that there be at least one accessible parking space, regardless of the number of spaces that there are. So if there are only 4 or 5, one of them should be accessible. And if there are more than that, then 1 out of every 25 spaces should be accessible. An accessible parking space should be at least 8 feet wide, and there should be at least a 4-foot access aisle, and it should be clearly marked with high contrast paint. And there should be signage as well indicating that the space is an accessible parking space. 1 out of every 6, at least one, and 1 out of every 6 accessible parking spaces should be van accessible. And that means that there is a wider access aisle in order for a wheelchair to be lowered out of a van that is using that space. The ground around the accessible parking space should be level and the surface should be stable and without cracks or broken pavement. And again, this is one of those instances where, use your common sense and take a look at the ground and see, whether you think that there would be a barrier imposed on a person who uses a wheelchair or a person who has a mobility impairment, and make note of that. And if there is a sidewalk provided at the accessible space, then there should be a curb cut to the sidewalk. If there is no parking provided, then the drop-off area for voters should be accessible. And again, that means level, free of any debris or impediments, and a curb ramp if there is a sidewalk. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the picture of two accessible parking spaces and highlights some of the features that I just discussed. There is a van accessible space with a van a wide access aisle next to it. And that shared space is used by the second accessible space for cars. There is a curb ramp to the sidewalk, and both of the spaces are clearly marked as accessible. And you can't quite tell from the photo, but the van accessible space is specifically marked as a van accessible van parking space. Next slide, please. So the next step in the process for this voter would be to get from the drop-off area or the parking area to the entrance to the polling place. So that path of travel and the entrances must be accessible. The path of travel should be clear. It should be reasonably lit. It should be unobstructed, and it should be uninterrupted by abrupt changes in level. There should be an accessible route that is at least 36 inches wide. And the distance that people have to travel should be roughly the same if they're using an accessible path of travel or not. There may be instances where the entrance to the polling place, the main entrance, is not accessible, and there may be an alternative entrance that is used that is accessible. That is okay. but either way, there must be at least one accessible entrance. And again, that path of travel for an individual who is using an entrance, an alternative entrance, which is accessible, should be roughly the same. The amount of the distance that they need to travel should be roughly the same as a voter without a disability who's using the main entrance. If that is the case and there is an alternative accessible entrance, there should be very clear signage indicating where that accessible entrance is. And the accessible entrance should be unlocked at all times. This is something that we've seen come up quite often where the signage is not there or is not clear, or that alternative entrance is locked. And if a voter with a disability goes to that entrance, they can't get in, and oftentimes won't be able to get around to the other entrance in order to receive assistance getting into that accessible entrance. So that should be unlocked if there is an alternative entrance. If there are stairs, then there should be a ramp. And again, the ramp, the surfaces should be non-slip, uninterrupted by abrupt changes in level, and there should be handrails. And the doors at the entrance or the alternative accessible entrance should be able to be operated independently with a closed fist. They should be at least, that's a typo, I apologize for that, they should be at least 32 inches wide. And the threshold should not have a lip that is more than a half an inch. If there is, then that should be beveled in some way. Next slide, please. So we have from past surveys that we have done, we have a couple of photographs in these next few slides of problems that we've encountered in inaccessible entrances. So here, this photo shows a path of travel to an entrance which is not level, it's not clear of debris. There are cracks in the surface. There are changes in level, it looks like, that could create a hazard for a voter with a disability. The door is propped open, which is a good thing. But the path of travel getting from where this picture was taken to that door would certainly create hazards for a voter with a disability. And so this is not an example of an accessible path of travel. Next slide, please. Here we have this is, as you can see in the background there, it's the same path of travel. And this is kind of a wider shot. And what this picture depicts is another problem that we encounter sometimes, and that is that there are things that are blocking the path of travel. So that path needs to be at least 36 inches wide. This polling place chose to place a sign that clearly, impedes that 36-inch wide path of travel. There are also some crates that are piled up along the side of the wall there, which I think do the same. And if you encounter something like this, we would ask that you take that measurement. There's an example here in this photo, just to show and maybe get a close-up shot as well of the tape measure, just to show that the path of travel is narrowed to less than 36 inches. These are problems, these are all movable objects. So these are problems that are created where there is, a fairly easy solution. And oftentimes we're able to resolve these relatively quickly. So please let us know if you encounter issues like this. Next slide, please. And this is just another example of a path of travel to that same accessible entrance. I should say really inaccessible entrance, that is not ideal because of the slope of that sidewalk. which is probably, it appears to be greater than 5%, greater than 1 in 20, 1 inch of rise for every 20 inches of run. And so that would be a slope which would again create a hazard and be a violation of the ADA requirements. Next slide, please. So once a voter is on the interior of the polling place, again, there should be an accessible path of travel. It should be unobstructed. Again, at least 36 inches wide. There should not be any protruding objects. So anything, any objects that sort of are come out from the wall should not be higher than 27 inches, so that a voter who is blind and uses a white cane would be able to identify that there is a protruding object. So 27 inches would be the limit there. What polling places can do in those situations is use a cone, put a cone on the ground to temporarily, so that the individual would be able to identify that there is a barrier. The voting booths where people cast their ballots should be accessible. There should be at least one which has space to accommodate a wheelchair. And any accessible voting equipment, including the AutoMark machine, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, should be readily available and should be set up at a height that is no higher than 48 inches. Polling places are also required to post ballots so that a person who uses a wheelchair or a person of short stature can view it, and that should be at a height of no more than 48 inches. And polling places should also be willing to provide accommodations to give space for someone who needs to rest, who cannot wait in line if there is a long line of voters waiting to cast their ballot. As an accommodation, they should be able to rest somewhere and not lose their place in line. And again, when you get the PowerPoint, there'll be a link here to the Secretary of State regulations that go into more detail about the requirements for polling place accessibility, and that would be a good thing to review before you do a survey. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about accessible voting equipment. Here, again, we have a photograph of two spaces where voters can cast their ballot, and one of them is wheelchair accessible. There's also this voter also has a service animal, and that is also, as an accommodation under Title II, a requirement that the polling place allow a voter who has a service animal to have their service animal with them when they're casting their ballot. Next slide, please. So by law, every polling place must be equipped for voters with disabilities with accessible voting equipment. They should have at least one accessible voting machine, and in Massachusetts we use the AutoMark. It's a ballot marking device. It uses audio cue capacity. It can magnify ballots or display a ballot in high contrast, and can also produce an oral report to the voter of their choices, and can also read the choices that the voter has made back to them in a variety of languages to ensure that it has correctly marked the person's ballot. Very importantly, the AutoMark can be used by any voter. Person does not need to identify as a voter with a disability in order to be able to use the AutoMark. And in fact, usually when I go to vote, I use the AutoMark to ensure that it is set up correctly and it is working. And as part of a polling place survey, it is very important that we get that information to ensure that the AutoMark machines have been set up correctly, that they are in an accessible location, that they do allow for a private vote, and that they're working correctly. and we would ask that you check on that. Next slide, please. So we have a poll here, and I'll just read it out. Have you ever seen or used an AutoMark machine? Choose one. I have seen an AutoMark at my polling place, but I have never used it. I have used the AutoMark, or I have never seen nor used the AutoMark at my polling place.
Great. So we're just waiting for people to respond. And it looks like most people have responded, so I'll end the poll.
Thanks, Brianna. So half of you have never seen or used an AutoMark at your polling place. 38% have seen it but have never used it. So that's surprising. I'm a little disappointed that many of you have not seen the AutoMark at your polling place. And I hope that that it's not because it wasn't there, because by law, again, every polling place should have an AutoMark machine, and it should be set up so that a voter can use it. So again, we would ask that as you do your survey, you check to make sure that it is there and operating. Next slide, please, Brianna. For later viewing, there is a link in this slide to instructions on how to use the AutoMark machine. And again, that would be good background information for you to have as you go prepare to do a polling place survey. So we have another poll. Alex goes to an early voting location. Alex has a disability which makes it difficult to read, so they prefer to use the AutoMark. When Alex arrives, they ask to use the AutoMark, but the poll worker says that they don't set it up for early voting. They only set it up on election day. And the poll worker offers to help Alex mark a printed ballot. So what are Alex's options? A, polling places are required to have AutoMarks even on early voting days. So Alex should contact their local elections official and the elections division of the Secretary of State for assistance. Alex should follow up with the Secretary of State's office and Disability Law Center to let them know about this. C, polling places are not required to have AutoMarks set up for early voting, so Alex should accept the poll worker's help, or A and B.
All right, we'll wait for a couple more to respond. All right, most people have answered, so I'll end the poll.
Great. So 100% of you chose D, which is both options A and B, and that is correct. Even on an early voting day, there must be an AutoMark machine set up and operable. And so if you encounter a situation where it is not, please follow up with the Secretary of State's office and follow up with the LC as well. So frequent issues that we've seen with the AutoMark, they are becoming more outdated. So we do see issues with just their overall operability. It may jam at times. The ink has been known to dry out. We did last election cycle, we had a report from a blind voter who had to wait an hour and a half for them to fix the AutoMark and get it to work properly. So please be aware of those types of issues that involve just the age of the machines. We've also seen situations where the AutoMark machine is not set up. It's not set up in an accessible location or in a private location. And unfortunately, many election workers are still not familiar with how to use the AutoMark or with the fact that, again, any voter can use it for any reason. So we do encourage you to try to use it, make sure that it's set up and that it's working correctly. Next slide, please. Um, the Secretary of the Commonwealth is looking into replacing the auto marks because they are getting quite old. They will be holding equipment fairs this summer, so please stay tuned for that. We will ask for your assistance in that process. Next slide, please. And also finally be aware that, as Tatum mentioned earlier, as a voter under Title II of the ADA, an individual certainly has the right to request a reasonable accommodation if they do need some sort of change in the process to give them the ability to vote independently and privately. So please feel free to, if you need an accommodation, to speak to a poll worker or speak to the warden or the person in charge of the poll if necessary. Because if you choose to vote in person, you certainly have the right to do so. Voting by mail and electronic voting are options, but they're not a requirement. And all polling places should be accessible so that you can vote independently in person. So again, if you do encounter any accessibility issues, there'll be a link here to this polling place accessibility survey that we have. Please feel free to get in touch with Brianna and or with DLC, and our contact information is here. You can also contact the local election official in your town or city or the ADA coordinator. There are a variety of voter protection hotlines, including 866-R-VOTE. And also the Secretary of the Commonwealth is available to help with any accessibility issues. So that contact information is on this slide. Thanks, Brianna.
Alrighty, thank you so much. And quickly, I'll just go over some opportunities to volunteer and advocate for voting access, which I think we've already discussed in a lot of detail. So again, here are some ways that you can get involved in Rev Up Massachusetts. You can help register voters. This might look like a voter registration drive or just registering some people in your community. You can take part in polling place accessibility surveys, like Tom was just discussing. You can join our coalition meetings, and our Rev Up Massachusetts website is linked here. You can help recruit volunteers and share information about Rev Up. And you can engage in upcoming accessible voting machine testing, which Tom was just discussing. Stay tuned to our email list for that info. And you can contact us regarding any barriers to voting for voters with disabilities, including access to accessible vote by mail, generally access to voting, or independent voting. So making sure that people are able to vote on their own and make their own choices. Particularly, we're interested in how things are working out for facility residents. They encounter lots of barriers to voting. So some important dates to keep in mind. Voting hours and locations might vary by town or city in local elections. There are some local elections happening across Massachusetts in May and June. For state elections that are happening this fall, the primaries happen on September 1st. Polling places are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on state election days typically. And the state primary day is September 1st. The general election is November 3rd. The registration deadline for the upcoming primary is August 22nd. And the vote by mail application deadline is by 5 p.m. on August 25th. So if you want to vote by mail, you'll want to make sure to get your application in by 5 p.m. on August 25th. And there's also early voting between August 22nd and August 28th for the primary. Again, your hours and locations are going to be different depending on where you live, so you'll want to check in with your local election office on that. And I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much for joining the Rev Up Massachusetts 2026 webinar. I hope that this inspired you to get involved with Rev Up, and I hope you learned something about polling place accessibility and voting options, and voter registration. I will have my contact information on this slide. My name is Brianna again, and I'm the voting rights advocate at DLC. My email and phone number are on this slide. DLC's information is on the following slide. And we also have RevUp Massachusetts website linked, www.revupma.org. We also have an email address, info@revupma.org. Any of those methods will probably get you in touch with me or possibly Tatum or Tom. All right, so we'll respond to some questions in the chat. First, I think we only have 8 minutes left, so we'll start out with questions in the chat first. Great. So we have a lot of good questions in the chat. So Trisha asks, the question is, are disabled persons required to show up in person to register to vote with their placard in order to receive mail-in voter privilege? And how to add a privacy layer due to the ACP program?
You definitely don't. They take your word for it. You can apply online or through a vote by mail written application, and they do not ask for verification. The only circumstance where some sort of documentation may come into play is if you're asking to be permanently put on an absentee voter list on the basis of disability. If they are trying to demand that you prove you're entitled to vote remotely, that's something you can call us about. But I think most important to know is that for vote by mail, you don't even have to have a reason in Massachusetts. If you timely apply for vote by mail, it could be for any reason whatsoever.
Thanks, Tatum. Sue is asking how I believe this is in reference to the poll, a question that we had that I think Tatum's poll question. How will Veronica vote independently by mail or absentee if she can't see? And so I can answer that. You know, typically, if she wants to vote independently, probably recommend voting via accessible electronic ballot. However, it's her choice if she wants to have someone help her out, if she needs that assistance. So, for example, her roommate could help her out. And so that's her choice. Kay asks if a hospitalization is planned for the voting day, are you required to use vote by mail or absentee?
I mean, unless you don't want to go to your planned hospital appointment. They're not going to transport you from the hospital to your polling place.
Yeah. And you can always, apply to vote by mail and get your mail-in ballot and return it, before that hospitalization appointment. So you have a surgery on September 1st. But you'll often get your vote by mail ballot, Oh,
Also,
oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
Brianna. It's also important to know that if you get your vote by mail or absentee ballot, you can still go to your polling place.
Yeah.
If it turns out you're available and your medical issue has resolved or you were released earlier than planned, you're not bound by your application to engage in remote voting. You can still go to your polling place.
Thank you, Tatum. That's such a good point. I think a lot of people forget about that or don't realize that they can change their mind. Um, Jen asks if a guardian is refusing to allow someone to vote, how can that person report it to someone and how? Can that person report it to someone and how? I would say yes, and they should call or fill out our intake form on Disability Law Center's website. Um,
I don't, I agree with what Brianna said. I think the bigger issue, however, may be that if they happen to be living in any type of facility, is the facility blocking their access to voting based on the wishes of the guardian? Because they're not allowed to do that. Unless they have a guardianship order that says the person can't vote, the place where the person lives has to allow them to access it. And even if that puts them in some sort of um, uncomfortable position with the guardian. But, that's something you can absolutely call DLC about. And it's not necessarily that we'll be able to change the mind of the guardian, but we should be able to help the person get access to voting.
thank you. We'll have time for maybe a couple more questions, but we have a hard stop at 2:30. Um, Kay says, generally the location of accessible parking should be close to the entrance. Sometimes on voting day, extra temporary accessible spaces are designated. What should the location be for those? This is in my medium-sized suburban town. I'll hand this to Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Kay. That's a very good point. That the accessible parking should be as close to the accessible entrance as possible. If there are extra spaces designated, they should also be as close as possible to the accessible entrance, and or to the accessible path of travel to that entrance. So if there's a curb ramp from the parking area to the path of travel, then the accessible spaces and any extra accessible spaces which are set up for election day should be adjacent to or as close to that curb ramp as possible.
I just want to jump back to a question that someone asked about if about privacy due to the ACP program, which stands for Address Confidentiality Program. I'm not sure if Tatum or Tom, you have any thoughts on that. We can always research it afterwards.
I don't, I'm not sure enough to be able to give an answer, but if it's something that you really need some clarity on, please reach out and we'll certainly research and try to give you the best answer we can.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be doing some research on that. That's an interesting question. Um, I think we're almost at time, so I'm going to save this chat because we have a lot of other really great questions. And you can also feel free to email me afterwards with your questions. Um, and I think we're going to wrap up. The survey link for feedback on this presentation is in the chat. Um, and I hope you all will fill it out and have a great afternoon. Thank you
Thank
Thank
you,
all.
you,
everyone.
everyone.